The lake had always been quiet, hidden deep between green hills and tall trees. It was not a large lake, but it was full of life. Birds sang from the branches, fish moved in the clear water, and deer often came to drink at the shore. Few people from the nearby towns ever made the long walk through the forest to find it. That was the way Aaron liked it, because to him the lake was more than just water. It was his family's history and his own life's comfort. Aaron grew up near the water. His father had built a small wooden house not far from the shore. As a boy, Aaron spent long days swimming in the cool water during summer, or sitting with a fishing line waiting for a catch. He watched how the lake changed with every season. In summer it shone like glass under the bright sun. In autumn it carried leaves that fell from red and gold trees. In winter it grew hard with frost and thin ice along the edges. In spring it swelled with new rain and melted snow from the hills. Every season gave the lake a new face, but it was always the same to Aaron: calm, steady, and faithful. His father used to say that the lake had a heart and that people should never harm it. Behind the trees, hidden from strangers, was the old dam. It had been built many years before Aaron was born. Some said it was made by settlers who wanted to keep the water steady. Others said it was built to control flooding in the valley. The truth was not fully known, but Arun's father had shown him everything about it. The dam was not tall or grand. It was made of heavy stones fitted tightly together. At the center was a strong gate with thick wood and metal hinges. When the gate was opened, water rushed out into the stream that flowed into the valley. When the gate was closed, the lake grew full again. Aaron's father had taught him how to care for the dam. He taught him when to let the water flow and when to close it tight. He told him that the balance of the lake depended on this work, and that it should never be left to break or weaken. As the years passed, Aaron kept the duty. He checked the stones, replaced the wooden boards when they aged, and made sure the gate was never stuck. Few people even knew the dam existed, for it was hidden by thick brush and large rocks. Only his family had ever cared for it. For a long time, life remained simple. Aaron fished when he needed food, planted a small garden near his house, and kept a few goats. He would often sit in the evening, listening to frogs call and watching the water shine under the moon. The lake gave him peace, and he gave it care. He thought it would always remain this way. But one spring morning things began to change. Aaron woke to the sound of engines in the distance. At first he thought perhaps it was hunters or travelers passing through, yet the sound did not fade. Instead it grew louder. Curious, he walked along the forest path until he reached the northern edge of the lake. There he saw men with machines. They wore bright shirts, hard helmets, and heavy boots. Some carried tools, while others set down wooden stakes in the ground. Aaron stood quietly and watched them hammer markers into the soil. Soon more vehicles arrived, bringing larger machines. The once quiet forest was filled with noise. Later that day, Aaron spoke to one of the men. The man explained they were part of a homeowners association from a town nearby. They had purchased land by the lake and had big plans. Their plan was to build many cabins, not just a few, but nearly 80 in number. They said it would be a vacation spot, a place for families to come and enjoy the water, the forest, and the peace of nature. But when Aaron looked around, he saw no peace. He saw trees marked with red paint ready to be cut down. He saw heavy machines standing where deer once passed. He saw soil already broken by sharp blades. Aaron tried to warn them. He said the lake was not meant for so many cabins. He told them that the water was delicate, that the balance of the land could not hold such a load. He reminded them that the lake had lived quietly for generations, and that too much change could harm it. The leaders of the HOA laughed at him. They said he was only one man living alone and that he did not understand progress. They told him the cabins would bring visitors, money, and joy. They said the lake would not die but would grow into a brighter place. Aaron said no more. He knew they would not listen. He walked back to his home, and as he sat by the water that evening, he thought of his father's words. The lake had a heart, but people could wound it if they were careless. Days turned into weeks, and the noise grew louder. The forest lost its calm. Trucks came and went, carrying wood, metal, and stone. Workers shouted and sang as they worked. Trees fell one by one, leaving open ground where once there had been shade. The sound of birds lessened. The deer moved farther into the hills. Aaron still walked to the shore each day, but his heart grew heavy. The water was not as clear as before. Dust and waste flowed from the building sites into the lake. Fish swam deeper, harder to catch. The song of frogs at night grew quieter. He thought of speaking again to the HOA leaders, but he remembered their words. They did not see the lake as he saw it. They saw only profit, numbers, and guests to come. To them, the lake was a tool, not a living memory. One afternoon, Aaron decided to walk toward the dam. He had not checked it for weeks because of the noise and the dust. As he pushed through the brush, he felt a strange mix of anger and calm. The dam stood as it always had, strong and silent. The stones were firm, the gate still closed, and the water pressed against it. Aaron placed his hand on the wood and felt the steady push of the lake behind it. He stood there for a long time. He thought of his father, who had trusted him with this duty. He thought of his childhood, when the lake had been only his and the forest's. He thought of the men who had laughed at him, who cut down trees without care, who promised cabins and joy but brought only noise and dust. A thought grew in him, slow but firm. He remembered his father's voice saying the lake was alive. He remembered the secret of the gate, the hidden power that only he truly understood. The HOA had built 79 cabins on land that had never belonged to them in spirit, even if papers said otherwise. They thought they controlled the lake. They did not know that Aaron held its heart in his hands. As the sun set that evening, Aaron walked back to his house. He said nothing, but inside he carried a plan. He knew that the dam could release more than just a trickle of water. He knew that if the gate was opened fully, the lake would change overnight. The cabins, the roads, the promises of the HOA, they all stood in the shadow of the old stones. And only Aaron knew what would happen if he chose to open the gate. The following weeks brought more changes to the quiet lake. Aaron watched from the shadow of the trees as the strangers turned the once peaceful shore into a worksite. The hum of birds and the soft splash of water were now buried under the roar of engines and the sound of hammers striking wood. Every day more trucks arrived. They carried beams of timber, rolls of pipes, sheets of metal, and heavy stones. Where once there had been soft ground covered in pine needles, there were now piles of supplies. Roads were carved roughly into the forest so vehicles could come and go. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, was not just a group of workers. They brought planners, supervisors, and even men who walked with maps in their hands. They argued about where to put cabins, where to cut trees, and where to place walkways. Arun stayed hidden when he could, but he sometimes stepped out when the workers were near his home. He wanted to see with his own eyes what they were building. The cabins rose quickly. At first they were only frames of wood, standing crooked like skeletons. Soon walls were nailed in place, roofs were added, and glass windows were fitted. Aaron counted them silently. 10, 20, 30, more came. The number grew until it was close to 80. Aaron shook his head whenever he thought about it. The lake had always carried balance, but now the balance was broken. Each cabin meant more people would come. More waste would find its way into the water, and more noise would chase away the animals. He remembered walking with his father long ago, listening to him speak of the lake's spirit. His father had said, "The lake breathes with the land. If people take too much, it will choke." Those words now echoed in Aaron's mind each time he saw another cabin standing tall, where once a tree had grown. One morning, as he fished near the shore, a young man from the HOA approached him. The man wore clean clothes and carried papers in his hand. He smiled at Arun as if they were friends. "You should be happy," the young man said. "This place will become famous. Families will come here to rest, to laugh, to live in comfort. You will no longer be alone by the lake." Arun looked at the man with calm eyes. The lake was never lonely. It had its own company, and that was enough. The young man laughed lightly, thinking Aaron was joking. "You will see. This is progress. You cannot stop progress. When these cabins are finished, people will bring joy to this place. It will no longer be forgotten." Aaron did not answer. He turned back to his fishing line. The man, seeing no more use in speaking, walked away. But Aaron's heart grew heavier. He knew the man's words held no truth. The lake had not been forgotten. It had been kept safe. Now, under the hands of the HOA, it was being broken in the name of progress. As the days passed, workers cleared more trees. They built paths of stone, set up lights, and even made small docks reaching into the water. Aaron noticed oil on the surface near those docks, shining in strange colors. Fish no longer swam near the shore. The reeds that once hid birds were trampled flat. Still, Arun stayed quiet. He did not shout. He did not fight. But at night, as he sat by his small fire, his mind returned again and again to the dam. The old stone stood steady, guarding the water. The wooden gate was strong. He alone knew how much water the lake held back. He alone could decide if it stayed or if it poured into the valley below. He was not a cruel man. He did not wish to harm anyone. Yet he thought about what the HOA was doing. They had not asked the lake for permission. They had not respected the balance. They believed the land belonged to them because papers and money said so. But Arun felt the truth was different. The land belonged to itself, and the lake was its heart. One afternoon, Arun walked along the edge of the cabins. He moved slowly, watching carefully. Children from nearby towns had come to play among the half-finished buildings. They shouted and laughed, throwing stones into the lake. Their parents sat on chairs, speaking proudly about the vacations they would soon enjoy. "This place will bring good fortune," one of them said. "I am glad the association had the courage to build here. We will have fishing, boating, and everything else we need." Another replied, "Yes, and soon they will even open a store nearby. Perhaps more cabins will come in the future." Arun listened silently. The words pierced his chest like sharp thorns. More cabins. More people. More harm to the lake. He turned away and walked back to his home. That night he lay awake, listening to the restless sound of engines still working late in the dark. He thought of the dam again. He thought of how quickly water could change everything. He thought of how the cabin stood on soil that had once been soft, but was now bare and weak. He thought of how the HOA had forgotten that nature did not bend forever. The next morning he rose before the sun. The air was cool and mist rose from the lake. He walked to the dam, moving through thick brush and stepping over roots. When he reached it, he placed his hands on the stones. They were damp and cold. He touched the wooden gate and felt the steady push of the lake's water pressing against it. Aaron stood there, quiet, his mind full of old memories. He remembered his father's hands guiding his own as a boy, showing him how to lift the gate slowly, how to let the water flow without breaking the balance. He remembered his father's voice, strong and calm, telling him that the dam was not a weapon but a tool. But now, as Aaron looked at the cabins across the water, he felt the truth was different. The dam was a guardian, and it was his choice whether that guardian would remain silent or speak loudly. He walked back to his house and sat down with a piece of paper. He began to write a letter. His words were simple, for he was not a man of many writings. "The lake is not yours," he wrote. "It does not belong to the HOA. It does not belong to money or cabins. It belongs to itself, and you must respect it. If you do not, it will answer in its own way." He left the letter near the cabins where the workers would find it. The next day, some men read it and laughed. "An old man's warning," one of them said. "He is only afraid of change." They threw the letter aside and continued with their work. Aaron saw them laugh and his heart grew colder. He did not leave another warning. Instead, he turned inward, speaking only to the lake in his heart. The cabins neared completion. Shiny paint covered their walls, new doors were fixed, and glass windows reflected the sunlight. Wooden decks stretched toward the water, waiting for guests to sit and rest. Signs were raised at the entrance of the new road, calling the place Lakeview Retreat. Aaron read the sign one evening as he walked past. He shook his head. To him, it was no retreat. It was the beginning of the end. That night, as the moon rose high, Aaron returned once more to the dam. He carried a lantern and walked slowly, carefully. He placed the lantern on a stone and looked at the gate. The water pressed hard as it always did, waiting for release. Aaron placed both hands on the thick wood. He breathed deeply. He did not lift the gate yet, but in his mind he already saw the water rushing through. He saw it tearing at the soil, flooding the valley and drowning the dreams of the cabins. He saw the lake answering the disrespect it had been shown. He stepped back, his heart beating strong. The choice was his, and he knew he would soon make it. The cabins were almost finished now. Bright paint covered their walls. Roofs were sealed against the rain, and the glass in the windows shone in the sunlight. To the members of the HOA, the project looked like success. To Arun, it looked like a wound on the heart of the lake. From his small house, he could hear laughter and music as workers celebrated their progress. They gathered near fires at night, eating and drinking, talking about the future. Arun stayed in the shadows, watching but never joining. He felt like a stranger in the place that had once been his home. One morning, Arun walked to the shore. He bent down to fill a bucket with water, but the water was no longer clear. Mud floated near the surface. Pieces of wood and scraps from construction lay near the shore. He lifted the bucket and shook his head. The lake was being choked. As he stood there, he noticed a group of children throwing stones into the water. They laughed as the stones made splashes. Their parents were nearby, walking along the shore and speaking about how lovely the lake would be once the cabins opened. One of the parents said, "This place will soon be alive with visitors. They will swim, they will fish, they will take boats out. It will be the best vacation spot in the whole region." Another replied, "Yes, and we will make good money. The cabins will bring profit for many years." Aaron turned away. He walked back slowly to his house, carrying the bucket with heavy steps. Inside his heart, anger began to grow, but it was not quick anger. It was slow and steady, like water filling behind a dam. That evening, Aaron visited the dam once more. He pushed through the brush and stood before the stones. The gate was closed tight, holding back the great weight of water. He placed his hands on the wood and felt the strength pressing against it. The lake was waiting. It was silent, but it held power. Aaron whispered to himself, "They do not know. They build on land that is not safe. They think the lake is theirs, but it is not." The next day he tried once more to speak with the HOA leaders. He walked to the largest cabin, where men and women sat with papers and maps. They looked surprised to see him, but they allowed him to enter. Aaron spoke calmly. "This lake cannot hold what you are building. You cut too many trees. You bring too many people. The water will not stay quiet. You must stop before it is too late." One of the leaders, a man in a neat shirt and polished shoes, laughed softly. "Old man, you worry too much. The lake is fine. We have studied the land. We have engineers and plans. Do not fear. This place will be better than ever." Aaron shook his head. "You cannot measure the spirit of the lake with your plans. You cannot buy its balance with money." Another leader stood up and waved a hand. "That is enough. We thank you for your concern, but we are busy. Please return to your home. When the cabins open, perhaps you will see the good that comes from progress." Aaron left without another word. He knew they would not listen. Their minds were full of numbers and dreams of profit. They could not hear the warning in his voice. That night, storms rolled across the hills. Rain fell heavy on the lake and the wind shook the trees. Aaron lay awake listening to the roar of water. He thought of the dam holding strong under the force. He thought of the cabins, standing on new soil that was not yet firm. He thought of the future that was coming quickly, a future the HOA did not understand. In the morning, the storm passed. The air was fresh, but the ground was wet and soft. Aaron walked to the dam. He checked the stones in the gate. Water rushed against it harder than before, but it still held. He placed his hand on the wood and nodded. The dam was ready, if he chose to open it. Later that day, he saw more visitors arriving. Cars lined the new road. Families stepped out, walking among the nearly finished cabins. Children ran to the shore, shouting with joy. The HOA leaders smiled proudly as they guided the visitors, showing them the new retreat. Aaron stood far back, hidden among trees, watching. He saw the smiles, the laughter, the pride, but all he felt was sorrow. None of them saw the lake's pain. None of them noticed the muddy water, the missing birds, or the reeds crushed flat. That evening he returned home and lit a small fire. He sat in silence thinking. He remembered his father's words again. The lake has a heart. If people heard it, it will answer. Aaron wondered if he should be the one to let it answer. For days he wrestled with the thought. He was not a man of violence. He did not enjoy the idea of destruction. Yet each day the cabins grew fuller, stronger, and closer to opening. Each day the lake grew weaker. The balance was breaking and no one cared except him. One morning Aaron saw something that decided his heart. As he walked along the shore, he found a dead fish floating near the reeds. Its body was pale, its gills clogged with mud. He picked it up gently and held it in his hands. His eyes grew wet, but not from the water of the lake. He placed the fish back into the water and whispered, "I will not let them kill you." From that moment, his choice was clear. He would not beg the HOA again. He would not write another letter. He would not watch quietly as the lake was broken. He would act. Over the next week, Aaron prepared in silence. He cleaned the path leading to the dam so he could move quickly when the time came. He checked the hinges of the gate, making sure they were not stuck. He gathered tools and ropes ready to pull the gate open when his heart decided. At night, he walked the shore and studied the cabins. He learned where they stood, how close they were to the water, and how weak the soil looked around them. He saw lights glowing in their windows, signs of families already testing the new retreat. He knew they would soon fill with more people. The lake waited quietly, holding its strength behind the dam. Aaron waited too, his decision firm. He would open the gate, but he wanted the right moment. He wanted the HOA to see the truth. He wanted them to understand that the lake could not be owned. One evening, as the sun set and painted the water red, Aaron stood on the shore. He looked at the cabins across the lake, standing proud but blind. He looked at the forest, thinner now but still alive. He looked at the water, still strong but wounded. He spoke softly, as if the lake could hear him. "You are not alone. I will help you. They will learn that this place has its own voice." The night grew dark and stars filled the sky. Aaron sat outside his house, listening to the quiet sounds. His heart was steady. The time was close. The lake was ready. The dam was waiting. And so was he. The cabins of the HOA stood tall now, painted in bright colors and shining in the sun. Families had begun moving in for short stays even before the full opening. Children ran down wooden steps into the shallow water, throwing stones and shouting with joy. Parents carried baskets of food and set chairs along the shore. Music played from radios, echoing across the lake where once only the sound of birds had lived. Aaron sat on a rock some distance away, watching. He had never seen so many strangers by the lake at one time. Their laughter was loud, their movements quick, and their eyes blind to what lay around them. The water was no longer clear. Mud swirled in circles near the cabins. Small pieces of trash floated near the reeds. A place that had once been pure was now tired and heavy. Aaron's heart burned as he saw it. He remembered the days when only the call of a loon or the whisper of the wind filled the air. He remembered nights when the lake reflected the stars, unbroken and still. Now those memories seemed far away, hidden behind noise and smoke. That evening, the HOA held a gathering near the largest cabin. Lanterns were hung on poles, music played, and people spoke proudly of their success. "We have built something great," said one of the leaders. "This retreat will bring joy for generations. It will make this lake famous, and all of us will share in the profit." The people clapped and cheered. They raised glasses in celebration. No one thought of the lake. No one thought of the forest. Their eyes were only on the cabins and the money they hoped to make. Aaron stood among the trees, listening. His hands tightened into fists. He wanted to shout, but he held his silence. He knew words would not reach them now. They had gone too far. The next morning, heavy clouds filled the sky. The air was damp and thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was coming. Aaron knew storms well. They always tested the strength of the dam, and he had learned long ago how to manage the water. He walked to the dam that morning, pushing through wet brush and muddy ground. The stone stood firm, the gate tight. He placed his hand on the wood and felt the strong pressure of the water behind it. The lake was swollen from recent rain. The storm that was coming would only add to it. Aaron stood quietly, listening to the water pressing against the gate. He whispered, "You are ready. They do not respect you, but you will show them who you are." That night rain poured down. The storm raged across the hills and the wind howled through the trees. Lightning lit the sky in bright flashes. The cabins shook under the storm's force. Water poured into the lake from streams above, raising its level higher and higher. Aaron sat in his house, listening to the storm. He knew the dam was holding, but the weight behind it was greater than ever. He imagined what would happen if the gate were opened in such a moment. The water would rush out with unstoppable force, tearing soil and rock, running straight toward the cabins. When the storm passed by dawn, the lake was swollen and restless. Waves lapped against the cabin's docks. Muddy water reached far onto the shore. Aaron walked to the dam and checked it again. The wood was wet, the stones dark, but it still held strong. He placed his hand on it once more and closed his eyes. He felt the power of the lake waiting, as if asking for his command. That afternoon, the HOA leaders gathered near the entrance to speak to families. They announced the cabins would be ready for full use within a week. They promised boating trips, fishing events, and even plans for a small market near the retreat. People clapped and cheered again. Aaron stood at a distance, his face like stone. Later that day, a man from the HOA noticed him and walked over. He was one of the leaders, a tall man with sharp eyes. "You come often, old man," he said. "Why do you look at us with such anger?" This place is better now than before. We have given it life, Aaron replied calmly. The lake already had life. You have only stolen its peace. You cut its trees, you fill its water with waste, and you blind yourselves with pride. The lake will not stay silent, the man laughed, though uneasily. You speak as if the lake is alive. It is only water. We control it. We have engineers, plans, and studies. Do not worry yourself. Go back to your quiet house. Leave progress to us. Aaron turned away without another word, but inside his decision hardened. The storm had shown him the lake's power. The cabin stood too close, too proud, and too blind. He knew the moment was near. That evening, Arun returned to the dam. The sky was still heavy with clouds, though no rain fell. He carried a lantern and set it on the stones. The water pressed behind the gate, restless and strong. Arun touched the wood and whispered, "You are waiting. I hear you." He spent hours there, walking back and forth, feeling the strength of the water. He thought of his father again, who had told him the lake must always be respected. His father had never spoken of opening the gate in anger, but Aaron believed that respect meant more than care. It meant defending the lake when no one else would. The next day, as the sun rose, the cabins came alive with noise. Families stepped out to walk the new paths. Children laughed, parents spoke proudly, and workers finished the last touches on the retreat. Aaron watched from the forest. To them, the lake was nothing more than a backdrop for their joy. To him, it was a living heart under threat. By evening, he had made his choice. He would act soon. He would not wait for more cabins, more crowds, or more waste. The lake was his duty, as it had been his father's, and the dam was the key to saving it. That night, he prepared quietly. He gathered ropes, tools, and a strong wooden pole to help move the gate. He set them near the path to the dam, ready for the moment he would need them. His heart was steady, his mind clear. The lake slept in silence, holding its strength behind the stones. The cabins stood in their pride, unaware of what was coming. The valley waited, and so did Aaron. The morning sun rose weakly behind a veil of clouds. The air was cool but heavy with the smell of damp earth. The storm of the past nights had left puddles across the valley, and the soil was dark and soft under every step. The cabins, painted in bright colors, shone against the gray sky. Smoke rose from chimneys where families cooked breakfast. Laughter rang out as children ran between the houses, their boots splashing in puddles. To anyone standing near the cabins, the day looked calm. But to Arun, who walked toward the dam with slow and steady steps, it was not calm at all. The lake was restless. Its waves lapped against the shore with unusual force, carrying bits of broken reeds and floating branches. The water level had risen so high that some of the wooden docks were almost fully underwater. Aaron placed his hand on the gate of the dam. The wood was slick, the ropes tight, and the water pressed hard behind it. He whispered to himself, "It is almost ready." His eyes were dark, his jaw set. He felt both fear and strength in his chest. He remembered his father's words, spoken years ago when the dam was still young. His father had said, "The lake is not ours. We only guide it. If we lose respect, it will rise and remind us of its power." Those words echoed in Aaron's mind. He had guarded the lake all his life, fixing the stones, keeping the gate strong, watching its moods. Now he believed he must let it speak. That evening, the HOA leaders stood near the main cabin to make another announcement. They spoke proudly about their retreat. One of them said, "This place will welcome visitors from far and wide. We will build more cabins, add boats, and make this lake a treasure of the region." The people clapped and cheered again. Music played from a speaker, and families danced in the open ground. The smell of roasted food filled the air. Aaron stood on the edge of the forest, watching. His heart burned. Every cheer sounded like a wound to the silence of the valley. Later that night, when the celebration was over and lanterns flickered dimly across the shore, Aaron carried his tools to the dam. He moved quietly, his lantern covered with cloth to hide its glow. The night was silent except for the call of owls and the steady rush of water behind the gate. He set down his tools and studied the dam. The gate was strong but old. The ropes that held it steady were thick, yet the weight of water behind them was far greater. Aaron placed the wooden pole under the gate's beam and pressed gently. The wood creaked. The sound echoed in the dark. He stopped and pulled back. His heart raced. He whispered, "Not tonight, but soon." For the next 3 days, Aaron watched carefully. He walked around the cabins, listening to the voices of strangers. Some spoke of how beautiful the place was. Others planned fishing trips or talked about how much money the retreat would bring. Few noticed the muddy water, the missing fish, or the birds that no longer sang as they once had. Each night, Arun returned to the dam. He tested the ropes pushed against the gate and listened to the groan of wood under pressure. Each time he stopped before opening it fully. He was waiting for the right moment when the cabins were full, when the people were most blind, and when the lake was strongest. That moment came on the fourth day. The sky was heavy with rain again, and streams from the mountains poured into the lake. The water was higher than Aaron had ever seen. It lapped against the very edges of the cabins. Families still played by the shore, thinking only of their joy. That evening, the HOA leaders announced a grand dinner to celebrate the near completion of the retreat. They invited all families to gather near the largest cabin. Music played, fires burned, and tables were filled with food. Children laughed and ran, their voices carrying across the valley. Aaron stood in the forest watching the crowd. His eyes moved to the lake, which swelled and darkened under the gray sky. The waves struck the shore with heavy force, spilling mud and reeds onto the paths. The lake was restless. It was calling. As night fell, Aaron walked to the dam once more. He carried his tools in silence. The lantern light flickered under the cloth, casting faint shadows across the stones. The water roared behind the gate louder than ever before. Aaron placed the wooden pole under the beam and pushed. The gate shuddered. The rope strained, he pushed harder. The wood groaned. Water seeped through the cracks, spraying cold drops across his face. His muscles trembled, but he did not stop. With one last forceful push, the gate gave way slightly, and a surge of water burst through. It rushed into the channel below, roaring down toward the valley. Aaron pulled back quickly, his chest rising and falling. He had not opened the gate fully, only enough to test the lake's voice. The water roared down the rocks, crashing into the stream that led toward the cabins. He stood there watching the first warning. By morning, the cabins felt the effect. Paths were muddy, docks broken, and the water had risen into some of the yards. Families complained, but the HOA leaders calmed them. "It is only rain," they said. "The lake is large, but it is safe. Do not worry. We are in control," but Aaron knew better. The lake was not under their control. It had tasted freedom and it wanted more. That night he returned to the dam again. The sky was dark with storm clouds. Lightning flashed in the distance. The water pressed harder than ever. Aaron placed the pole under the gate and whispered, "It is time." With all his strength, he pushed. The wood groaned and cracked. The ropes snapped one by one. The gate burst open and a wall of water exploded forward. It rushed into the channel with unstoppable power, tearing soil, rocks, and roots from its path. The roar shook the valley. The surge raced downward, growing larger with every step. By the time it reached the cabins, it was a flood. Families screamed and ran as the water tore through paths, knocked over chairs, and smashed against cabin walls. Fires were extinguished. Lanterns fell. The music ended in chaos. People tried to gather their children, their belongings, but the water was faster. It swept through the retreat, covering the docks, filling the yards, and breaking into houses. Aaron watched from the forest, his face calm though his heart raced. He saw fear spread across the cabins, the same fear his father had once described when nature demanded respect. He whispered, "Now they will see." The water roared through the valley for hours, fed by the storm above and the open gate. By dawn, the cabins were ruined. Some stood tilted, their foundations washed away. Others were broken entirely, their wood scattered along the shore. The retreat was no longer a place of joy. It was silent, heavy, and broken. The HOA leaders stood among the wreckage, their proud words silenced. Families wept as they looked at their damaged homes and lost belongings. The once celebrated retreat had turned into a warning, carved into the land by the force of the lake. Aaron stood at the edge of the forest, unseen by most. He watched the ruins in silence. He did not smile, nor did he weep. His heart was heavy, but he believed the lake had spoken clearly. It had shown that it was not a toy, not a backdrop, but a power to be respected. And now he knew the valley would never be the same.